Let's go over the answers to chemical formulas practice. Let's start with set 1. In set 1, we have some subscripts and we have some letters that don't have subscripts. Please remember that when there's no subscript, then we are thinking of it as a 1. Okay, so there's a 1 after this C. This formula is carbon dioxide. There's 1 carbon and 2 oxygen. So I'm going to go over to my paper and put 1 for carbon, and you see it turns green, so I know I'm right, and 2 for the oxygen. Let's try the next one. Calcium chloride. Notice that calcium doesn't have a subscript, which means the subscript is 1. So now we know that calcium, there's 1, and chlorine, there's 2. So we're going to go over here and put a 1 and a 2. In this one, we have 3 different elements: potassium, carbon, and oxygen. Potassium has a subscript 2. Carbon doesn't have a subscript, so you can feel free to write in a 1. And then oxygen has a subscript of 3. So that means potassium, there are 2. Carbon, there is 1. And oxygen, there is 3. Now, let's try one more. Okay, so this is sulfur bromide. And you can see sulfur has just 1 because there's no subscripts. We'll write in a 1. But the bromine element, there are 2 atoms of bromine. So we'll go back over here and we'll put a 1 for sulfur. Hope it turns green. And a 2 for the bromine. Did we get it? Click out of there. Yep, we got it. Now we're going to go to set 2. Now in this set, we've added coefficients in front of the chemical formulas. What do they mean? What do they tell us? So let's just look. When we have a coefficient, like the 3 is here in carbon dioxide, that tells us that everything in the formula is repeated 3 times. So we have 3 times 1 carbon, or 3 carbon. And we have 3 times 2 oxygen, which would be 3 times 2, 6 oxygen. So I'm going to come over here and put a 3 for the carbon and a 6 for the oxygen. You see it makes it turn green. Try to think of the next one before we do it. The coefficient is 2, and it's going to multiply the entire molecular formula. So we can do 2 times the calcium. Remember, there's only 1 calcium in calcium chloride. So 2 times 1 would give us 2 calcium. And then 2 times the chlorine. How many chlorine did we have? So it's 2 times 2, or 4 chlorine. So now I'm going to come over here and type in 2 for the calcium and 4 for the chlorine. Let's take a look at the next one. Potassium carbonate. And we have 3 molecules of potassium carbonate. So it's going to multiply the whole formula. 3 times the 2 potassium would give us 3 times 2, or 6 potassium. How many carbons are we multiplying? Well, there's only 1 carbon, so 3 times 1 would give us 3 carbon. And then 3 times the oxygen. We have 3 oxygen, so 3 times 3 is 9 oxygen. And let's check our answer by plugging it in. 6 potassium, 3 carbon, and 9 oxygen. Now, if you think you have the hang of it, stop the video and go ahead and try number 4, and then come back and check. In number 4, we have 4 sulfur bromides. 4 is going to multiply the sulfur first, and there's 1 sulfur, so that's 4 times 1, or 4 sulfur. Then it's going to multiply the bromine, and there's 2 bromine. So 4 times 2 is 8 bromine. And let's plug in our answer. 4 and 8. Now each set gets a little harder, a little more complicated. So make sure you understand these before we go on to the next set. The next set has parentheses. Okay, our first one is calcium hydroxide. Why do we use parentheses? Well, sometimes there's a group of atoms that form a functional group, and hydroxide is one of them. Hydroxide is OH, so whenever you see an OH, they usually have it in parentheses and a coefficient, or I'm sorry, a subscript that tells you how many of these OH groups there are. So you have to use the parentheses. So let's flesh this one out and see what we have. We have 1 calcium, and we know it's 1 because there's no subscript. Then we have parentheses with a 2 outside of it. That means the 2 doubles everything inside the parentheses. So you look to the outside right of the parentheses to see what you're going to do. In this case, we're going to double everything. So 2 times the O and 2 times the H. Now both of these have no subscripts, so those are 1. So 2 times 1 is 2. 2 oxygen and 2 hydrogen. We can go ahead and put that on our answer sheet now. So we have 1 calcium, 2 oxygen, and 2 hydrogen. Let's take a look at this one. It's a little more complicated, more subscripts here. But don't let that worry you. Just look at what the subscript is applied to. This subscript 3 is applied to the barium in barium phosphate. So we'll have 3 barium. How many phosphate groups? The group phosphate has 2 of them. So the 2 is going to multiply everything that's in these parentheses. So this group, phosphate, gets multiplied by 2. So 2 times the 1 phosphorus is 2 phosphorus. And 2 times the 4 oxygen is 8 oxygen. So let's try that on our answer sheet. 3, 2, and 8. If you think you have it, stop the video and try the next 2 on your own, and then you can start the video to check. This one is lead nitrate. Lead is outside of the parentheses, so we just use whatever subscript it has, which is a 1 in this case, 1 lead. Now what's inside the parentheses? NO3 is inside the parentheses, so I'm going to box that off so I can concentrate on that now. And it says we have 2 of everything that's inside the parentheses. So we're going to multiply it. 2 times the 1 nitrogen, remember there's a 1 there if there's no subscript, so that's 2 nitrogen, and 2 times 3, or 6, oxygen. So we get 1, 2, and 6. All right, here's our last one of this set. The aluminum has a subscript 2, and it's outside of the parentheses. So this 3 doesn't bother the aluminum. So we have 2 aluminum, and this is called aluminum carbonate. Now let's see inside the parentheses. So I'm going to box my parentheses and see what's going on. We have 3 of these groups, carbonate groups. So that means 3 carbons, 3 times 1, or 3 carbons, and 3 times the 3 oxygen, 9 oxygen. And we're going to go ahead and put those in. 2, 3, 9. One more set. Now we have coefficients and parentheses. You really have to put everything together. First, we're going to take a look at the molecule itself. So let me trace the molecule. I'll trace it in red. This is our molecule. So we'll consider that first. And then we're going to apply our coefficient to whatever we get. Okay, you ready? So in our molecule, we're going to have the calcium, and the calcium's outside of the parentheses, so you can see there's one of those. Now this is inside the parentheses, so remember we have 2 times 1 or 2 oxygen, and 2 times 1 or 2 hydrogen. But now the 3 tells us that we have 3 of all of this. So the 3 is going to multiply like this. Oops, kind of went off my screen there. 3 times 2 and 3 times 2. So 3 times 1 or 3 calcium, 3 times 2 or 6 oxygen, and 3 times 2 or 6 hydrogen. So we can go ahead and put that in our box. Move this over. There we go. And so in the box, we're going to put 3, 6, 6. Do you remember what we just did? Let's look at the molecule. Everything that comes after this coefficient 2 is part of the molecule. Barium phosphate. So the 2 is going to multiply whatever we get in here. We have 3 barium. 3. How many phosphorus? It's inside the parentheses, so don't forget, if it's inside the parentheses, it's affected by the subscript outside of the parentheses. So we get 2 times the P, so 2 phosphorus, and 2 times the 4, or 8 oxygen. Now we're going to multiply by our coefficient. 2 times the 3, or 6 barium. 2 times the 2, or 4 phosphorus. And 2 times the 8, that's 16 oxygen. It's a lot of oxygen, right? So let's fill that in. 6, 4, 16. In our next one, we'll do it the same way, but pause the video if you think you have it and give it a try before we go on. I'm going to box the molecule first. This is our molecule. And figure out what I have in this molecule. There's 1 lead. Nitrogen's in the parentheses, which is affected by the 2. So that's 2 nitrogen, and 2 times 3, 6 oxygen. Now I'm going to multiply by the coefficient 3. 3 times 1, 3 lead. 3 times 2, 6 nitrogen. And 3 times 6, which is 18 oxygen. And let's try our answer in the boxes. 3, 6, 18. Okay, one more. Think you have it? First we look at the whole molecule. Everything after this 4, before the next plus sign in an equation, would be the molecule. And we're going to start with what's in the molecule itself. 2 aluminum. This gets multiplied by the subscript 3, so 3 carbon and 9 oxygen, 3 times 3. Now we're going to multiply by our coefficient. 4 times 2 is 8, so 8 aluminum. 4 times 3 is 12, so 12 carbon. And whoa, 4 times 9, do you remember what that is? 36 oxygen. and we can put those in the blanks. That's it. Email me if you have questions.